Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here joining us today. We're going to just have a little bit of a chill session. We're going to have the chats, we're going to have the giggles, just going to set you off nicely for the Thanksgiving holidays. And we're just going to basically talk about all things that's been happening over this past month in the world of crypto and the metaverse land. So joining me today is Raoul, C to the E to the O of Real Vision, Twitter thread master, as I like to call him, and our dear friend who is ahead of so many curves in the macro space and the metaverse space. So Kevin Kelly from Delphi Digital, welcome to the both of you.
That's one of the best intros I've ever heard.
That's right. Elaine, you're on your game today, I tell you.
Thanks,
I've got my bright shirt for your personality.
Lovely, lovely. Right, so how are we going to kick this off? Raoul, I'm going to shoot it over to you. What the hell do you want to talk about?
Well, I want to find out, look, there's always interesting shit going on at Delphi. So I want to know what Kevin and the team have been looking at, because there's a lot gone on. I mean, there's always a lot going on. It's crazy. Kevin, what have you guys been looking at? I know Remy's been hassling you, your team about Terra, stuff like that. What are you guys looking at?
Yeah, so I would say this week specifically, top of mind has obviously been a bit of the bloodbath.
Because you can't even remember last week.
Honestly, it's day by day at this point, right? A week feels like a year in this space. And there's so many things going on that we're starting to kind of hone in on a handful of really big kind of narratives and things that we want to focus more of our team on. You mentioned Terra, our entire labs division, focusing on building protocols there, which we can get into. But this week, I mean, top of mind has just been trying to make sense of what's going on in this market, right? And I think we've gotten a lot of inbound around, okay, prices are down, is the end of a bull market? And I know you certainly have some thoughts around that, but from just looking at some of the data, first and foremost, a lot of this was really kind of a deleveraging type of event, right? You saw, Bitcoin kind of slowly grind down, and then really the last, day or two took a pretty nice leg lower, and that really coincided with a lot of liquidations across some of these major exchanges, right? Like your Binances and your FTXs of the world. So to us, this has really been more of a deleveraging type of event, kind of getting some of that excess out of the system, and really isn't a narrative shift or anything fundamental that's changed in terms of our outlook.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, it's pretty typical. I mean, I love crypto markets because they're such human behavior. So everything broke out, new all-time highs. All the leveraged traders, generally in Asia, get excessively long. They'll get washed out. It retests the breakout and then goes higher again. It kind of happens all the time.
And it's like rinse, repeat. You see that time and again, right? Every time we see a breakout, it's almost like you have some people front run it, buy the rumor, sell the news. You almost sell into that breakout and that price strength. And then we've looked into some of these on-chain indicators that we follow, right? Specifically around, Bitcoin and ETH, that can give us an indication of, again, where some of these longer term holders are positioned. And to us, looking at things like, net holder positioning, right? What you actually tend to see is as Bitcoin's price starts to accelerate, you tend to see longer term holders, right? These kind of diamond hands, as you like to say in crypto, actually start to sell into that strength. And usually that precedes pretty strong periods of price appreciation. And we just started to see that ratio or that indicator turn negative, which is a positive sign for what could be to come over the next, let's call it 3 to 6 months within the Bitcoin land. Other things we track, on-chain exchange flows, nothing crazy there in terms of seeing a ton of inbound into exchanges as people try and usually position for selling into further strength. So we usually look at that as a more of a contrarian type of indicator, right? To just gauge where people's sentiment is and psychology is around this. Nothing too crazy there. We actually break down some of the on-chain flows across exchanges, right? So as you know, no two exchanges are alike. You compare like a Coinbase to a Binance. We track inflows, Bitcoin inflows into Binance, for example, to try and get a sense of a decent risk-on proxy, because typically what you tend to see is people put flows into Binance.
These are the people who get liquidated afterwards.
That and the people who want to trade some of these more esoteric assets, right? Because Binance is kind of the one of the gold standards, I guess you could say, in terms of the amount of assets that they have listed and liquidity on there. So what you'll tend to see is if you track, Bitcoin on-chain exchange inflows into Binance versus something like ETH BTC, which is let's call it a decent risk-on proxy. The two are not perfectly correlated to each other, but you tend to see periods in which you see those heavy inflows actually precede outperformance of something like ETH and the rest of the crypto market over Bitcoin. So again, just trying to play around with some of these ways in which you can leverage that on-chain data is something we focus a lot on too.
So there's something interesting about ETH, and I didn't get to the bottom of it, but there was this massive amount that kind of went off exchange again. And it looked like there was only 10%. Was that a real number in the end? Somebody said it was Kraken moving wallets around. But I mean, that trend has been in place, right? I mean, as people start staking and everything else, ETH, it's coming off exchange.
Yeah, it could have been. And one of the, I think, interesting or important caveats with some of that data is a lot of like, so we'll track how much ETH is locked up like smart contracts, for example, right? And part of that you can think of being locked up into some of these different DeFi protocols, but it's also providing liquidity on some of these decentralized exchanges for other assets, right? So yes, it's locked up in a sense, but it's not necessarily a supply that can't become liquid pretty quickly, right? So it's important to kind of track those types of things as well. But to your point, you look at things like the IP 1559, which essentially allowed for burning of ETH to start occurring, right, as the usage of Ethereum increases. And so we've tracked that over the last few months since it went live in August. And what you see is a pretty substantial amount of ETH is now being burned to the point where it's pretty much caught up with net supply coming to market, right, or net emissions through block rewards. So when you start to put that narrative in place around, demand obviously continue to increase, we think that's not a pretty large secular trend, but also the supply dynamics here and the fact that if you see Ethereum really continue to take off and see more usage, that burn rate is potentially going to even increase. It becomes really, really interesting in terms of the tailwinds again over the next, let's call it 3, 6, really 12 months for ETH here. So if the market does rip back to all-time highs, I mean, ETH is our bet on.
I mean, I look at that bloody ETH Bitcoin chart. It went up, perfect wedge.
Yeah.
If it breaks that 0.08, then it looks like it's going to double versus Bitcoin, something like that. And then if you look at the longer term chart, that whole pattern could be a kind of massive cup and handle or head and shoulders. I don't know what it's saying, but it's saying something crazy about ETH. And I think that's the most important chart in crypto right now.
Yeah. And quite frankly, what's really cool about this space now is it's mature enough and it's liquid enough that those types of classic technical patterns actually do play out, right? You had this period where when we originally first started Delphi, where I was doing some, technical analysis around even Bitcoin, and sometimes you'd have a lot of like false breakouts and it wouldn't necessarily trend exactly how you would think. And now to your point, I think we've gotten to a point where you can actually, even if you're a trader coming into this market, there's ways to really, really play the upside of these things in a very big way, especially with relative value trades and relative pair trades that you otherwise probably couldn't have 2 or 3 years ago. So it really is kind of a destination for just about everybody, even if you're not, let's say, crypto native by nature.
So wait, let's not move on too quickly away from that crazy chart that you've been talking about, because I mean the internet is talking about it, especially on Twitter, okay, because it's quite like a thing. So let me just ask you, because the market obviously this week is like a bloodbath, like the color of my top. I'm in solidarity with the markets, okay? So in the wise words of Bob Marley, for God's sake, Raoul, tell me, is every little thing going to be all right? Because the only numbers that I'm seeing in the green are Metaverse tokens. So I need a bit from both.
Elaine. It's all noise. This is a 100-volt asset right now, or a 70-volt asset. It goes up and down, and it makes no odds. Anything
I mean, I'm used to volatility, but this is like me looking at the charts, and one eye go, oh,
no,
how much can I take?
This is like, there's some spooky voodoo magic shit going on right now. I have been using a chart of ETH versus Bitcoin since 2013. The 2017 bull run in Bitcoin. And I found this chart a year ago, and it's worked almost perfectly ever since. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And this sell-off was flagged in advance.
It's stunning how accurate that's been. I love when you tweet those out, because I made a joke earlier too about and a recent note we put out, just talking about how you can come in and give us that shining light or that hope right at the moment we need it, right? Because I saw that I was sitting there, I'm just staring at price charts, I'm rerunning all these charts, and I see your tweet come across the thread, and it's just, everything's going to be okay. This is exactly what this chart would have expected. And honestly, to me, again, being well versed and just kind of deep into the space, I took a step back and I was like, okay, it gave me a sense of relief.
If this is right, I'm going to grab this little clip and just tweet the shit out of it.
Yeah, well, when I put it on Twitter, everyone's like, thank you, we're going to make it. I really hope you're right. And obviously there's a bunch of cynical people. I'm looking at the chart of ETH today, and it's doing exactly what it should do. It's kind of freaky.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.